Hey everybody, good to speak with you again. Another story for you today. This one's called the Vyadha Gita, and it is a story about using everyday life, our duties, the things that we sometimes think of as impediments or obstacles to our spiritual growth, and using them as a way to develop um, a deeper non-attachment and therefore a deeper love, doing things as we do solely out of love without an attachment to the consequence, and using that as a tool to get closer to our spiritual goals as well. So the story begins, it's a story of a yogi, a young man who decides he's going to take to spiritual life. And with the sort of zeal of this kind of young man, he um, goes off and renounces life, and he goes off into the forest to live as a yogi, as a sadhu, as somebody who devotes his life to meditation and performing spiritual austerities. And he goes off to live in the forest, and he's meditating under a tree, and he is reaching higher and higher states of evolution, of elevation, as he meditates more and more and more. And he brings himself right to the cusp of self-realization, when suddenly there is this loud squawking and rustling in the tree above him, and there's branches falling down and leaves and so on and so forth. And he's woken out of his meditation, and he looks up, and there's a crow and a crane, and they're fighting in the tree above him. And he's angry. He thinks to himself, how dare they disturb my meditation? And as he's thinking this, this bolt of energy leaves from his body and just zaps the crow and the crane, burns them to cinders, and they're gone. And so he stops for a minute, and he's sort of shocked at what happened. And then he's proud. He thinks to himself, wow, well, I must really be making progress if I'm able to zap a crow and a crane, by the mere thought of it, right? So he's developing his yogic powers, and he's becoming proud of them. And he thinks to himself, well, um, you know, if I'm becoming such a holy person, I'm going to go off into the village and find some food, as sadhus do, going from house to house looking for food. And he thinks to himself, well, what lucky householder will get to feed me, a sadhu like me? And he goes off to the first house he finds, and he knocks on the door, and there's no answer. He can hear people inside moving around and rustling about, and there are people there, and so he's thinking, oh, who is this to not answer the door for a sadhu like me? And then he knocks again, and then still no answer. And then finally he knocks a third time quite forcefully and says, hello, I need, I'm waiting for to be fed out here. And he hears from inside, he hears a voice that says, young man, I am not a crow and I am not a crane. You are just going to have to wait. And so this sort of throws the young yogi off. And he sort of sits there quietly. And then finally, the old woman comes to the door, opens the door, gives him some food, and says, I'm so sorry that you had to wait. I was taking care of my elderly husband. And so he takes the food, and he's about to leave when he turns and he has to ask her, he says, how did you know about the crow and the crane? And she says, well, I have made my daily routine part of my spiritual practice. I have learned to act with deep love, which is the kind of love which is not attached to results, to getting anything back. And I've used this to understand everything there is to understand about life. And it has allowed me to reach a certain state of evolution with this. But if you really want to understand, if you really want the teaching, you're going to have to go to the butcher who works in the city. So the yogi thinks to himself, well, I don't know what I have to learn from a butcher, right? A butcher being sort of a kind of person who deals in animal flesh, and he's a merchant and all these things, which are not sort of associated with great spiritual truth, usually. But he thinks, well, if the woman was able to know about the crow and the crane, then certainly I have something, so I might as well go off and look. So he goes to the city, and he finds the butcher there, and he's, you know, uh, chopping up meat with one hand and bargaining with customers with others, and wiping his hands on his clothing, and telling jokes and all these other things. And the yogi says, no, 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 I don't have anything to learn from this person. I'm not going to do this. And just as he's about to walk away, the butcher says, hey, young man, the old lady sent you, didn't she? And so he stops and says, well, yes. He's like, well, do you just wait a while. I'll talk to you in a bit. And so the yogi sits down, and the butcher is there telling jokes and having a good time and chopping up meat and selling it and bargaining with his customers and so on. And then the butcher sort of folds up his shop and says, walk with me. And the yogi walks with him and won't quite give him the teaching yet. He says, I still have other things to do. And he goes home, and he has to perform his worship, and he has to take care of his elderly parents, to bathe them, to feed them, to make sure that they are comfortable and well. Again, acting with that kind of love, which is non-attachment, not detachment, not indifference, but love done for love's sake. And the yogi sees this, and the butcher explains that this is indeed the case. This is how he has reached his state of spiritual enlightenment. His previous karma, his character, his status in life meant that he was a butcher, but it did not mean that he did not have a chance to develop this kind of deep, deep, deep love, this deep, deep, deep understanding of who we are in order to evolve spiritually and to go beyond the day-to-day. The day-to-day is enough to take you beyond the day-to-day. And so the next part of the story is where the butcher talks to the yogi and expounds upon the highest truths of the Vedanta. It's a lovely story and something for us to talk about next time. I hope you're well. I hope you enjoyed the story, and I hope to see you in person sometime soon. Stay safe.